Thanks very much. And there's a lot in what both Sheila and Stuart say that certainly as Oxfam we would agree with. But coming at this from a very practical point of view, it's quite a difficult argument to engage with because I think stabilisation strategies cover a huge diversity of different strategies. So pinning down actually what they are is quite a challenge. But there's been very little debate, I think much more debate around stabilisation and humanitarian, very little debate on development. So really welcome this opportunity to engage in this. I think the first thing to agree with is around, it is about a blending of narratives because we all would admit that the most challenging environments in which we're operating, certainly as development practitioners, are conflict-affected states. I've just come from a week of reflection with senior Oxfam programme staff in occupied Palestinian territories, reflecting on what we've learned, and what we've learned certainly doesn't work, and what we've learned does work in these states. So what we do know, I guess, is that we would completely agree that we have to work on preventing conflict and preventing instability in the fragile states of tomorrow and the fragile parts of states as well. And I guess, I would really, the one thing I would contest, Sheila, is some of your figures, because certainly by our calculation, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan have consumed over 40% of the total increase in OECD DAC donors' aid to all developing countries since 2002. So it doesn't feel to us like there's a disproportionate amount spent on other countries. In fact, it's quite the reverse. And I think it's really critical that within states as well, that disproportionate spend on, say, the south in Afghanistan is really unhelpful. There are just as poor but potentially unstable areas of Afghanistan that also need that aid. The second point would be around, the sort of, I guess, the locus of planning. Whilst, it's very good to hear that you want integrated planning, I guess the challenge we have with the stabilisation focus is that the focus of the planning unit, if you like, is on the unstable areas. And certainly what we've learned is that long-term development has to focus on all people's poverty and insecurity in those countries. And that often doesn't match the military objectives for who is being targeted. And I think if we don't do that, we can actually make things worse. If we are perceived to be biased, if we fuel inequality, then that in itself fuels ethnic divides and conflict. So that's one area where I think we have a slightly different view. The third area is, how effective are military people at delivering development aid? Well, I don't think they're very effective. There's a very simple, if you like, it's wasteful and often ineffective. And there's plenty of examples that I could give. But I guess one of the interesting ones that we would often quote is the sort of World Bank auditors in Afghanistan who found schools constructed, admittedly by US PRTs, about provincial reconstruction teams, to be, and I quote, unsanitary, unsafe, attracting attack, unsustainable, and 70% on average more expensive than Afghanistan Ministry of Education schools. So, I think that says it sort of loud and clear. Within the same areas, NGOs have established over 1,000 schools, serving 90,000 students using, and that's across some of the unstable provinces as well, which by the Ministry of Education's definition are much more successful in learning outcomes as well as safety. I guess, it's, as I said at the beginning though, it is a challenge for all of us as to what actually works in these states, and I wouldn't pretend that as Oxfam we have all the answers at all. But certainly some kind of state building, needs active citizens as well as effective states. And that requires societal engagement, which traditionally NGOs have got some expertise in. And I'd really welcome a recognition that the role of the military, to provide protection for civilians and that protection for space for development is really critical, as is the role of NGOs like ours in bringing our expertise to bear on how actually you can engage communities and get more participation. So just a couple of examples to finish with, really. One is from Yemen. So, and this is particularly interesting to us because we've been focusing on Yemen for many, many decades, and warning the government around the potential instability in Yemen. And the focus now is on Al-Qaeda, but we've been focusing on Yemeni women's access to justice, which is their biggest security threat, actually. And since 2002, been supporting the Yemeni Women's Lawyers Association in 5 provinces, providing free legal support, but also awareness and protection for women. In the last 6 months, 360 legal cases, for example. But that's actually been able to feed in to the developments in the justice system in Yemen as well, around discriminatory legal practices that need changing, with some, some admittedly limited, but with some success. The second area is in Kenya, and I could have chosen sort of Tanzania or Uganda, but particularly where we've worked with pastoralist communities, where we've worked with partners to really develop poverty-focused approaches to conflict. And enabled pastoralist associations to be set up and to help organise their community. And they've taken a really integrated approach, whether it's managing water resources or whether it's supporting small businesses in terms of your livelihoods agenda, and much more collectively representing marginalised communities to national government. Because I think the one thing you left out, Sheila, in your list of 4 things is voice. It is really, really important that people feel they have a voice. And whilst the governance side of the agenda in terms of effective states, there's a real governance voice issue that I think is really, really important in long-term development work. So to be effective, we've learnt that we have to make a long-term commitment. We're talking about 10 to 15 years. How does that fit with the Stabilisation Unit's agenda? I'm not too sure, but it certainly doesn't fit with our donors' agenda. The donors who are providing money in a lot of these states are interested in 3 to 6 month impact. Now, how does that fit with a 10 to 15 year strategy? So the quick fixes often lead to quick collapse in our experience, and we're interested in some quick impact, but over a long-term strategy. We really need to understand how change happens. The theories of change is really, really critical. And I think it's, for us, we know that change happens in fragile states in very unpredictable and emergent ways. Spaces open up. If you're too slow in your analysis, then you miss that opportunity for really helping to bring about and support effective change. So we as agencies have got to have planning systems that are capable and leaders that are capable of really leading in those environments. And that's very, very tricky for us. And the iterative power analysis that we expect our people to engage in as outsiders, as you said, Stuart, is something that really, really challenges ourselves, let alone heightened levels of risk assessment as well. And yet, for a lot of our staff, they're not very attractive places to work either. So that makes us, extremely challenged as to what we do. We know we need to be brave. We need highly skilled staff, because some of the convening we've done of very antagonistic actors and groups within fragile states has been some of the work that we're most proud of. But that is both dangerous. You have to be brave and you have to be highly skilled to do that. And we need to be honest and recognise where aid can actually make a situation worse. And we're not very good at honesty in our sector, I would say, including ourselves. And it requires much more self-reflection and speedy reflection in order to either kill off the ideas that aren't working or really scale up the answers that do. And again, that's not something that we have a brilliant track record on.
Very good.